come. Okay, so I think the first thing to make sure that we credit you correctly is, can you just quickly state your name and maybe like from that you're from the Seychelles and that you're a fisherman or an elder or a counselor, or I'm not quite sure if you have different functions.
Okay, my name is Tom Watts. My dad's name was the same, and in our culture we have many languages. Like I've had Tutop, I've had Nagay, and I've had a few other native names I don't know, but it meant the person that is that does many things. But yeah, I've lived here all my life, and I finally got reached an elder's age, and enjoying life, and just hoping things go on forever.
How old are you, Tom, right now?
I'm 80 years old.
And you're still fishing for salmon?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was your very, very first memory of salmon in any way, fishing or not, eating,
Yeah.
fishing with your granddad, or whatever, your first memory of salmon?
It didn't matter. All kids when they were growing up in my time were fishermen. We all had a commercial, well, not a commercial fish day, but a community fish day. And everybody went up there and took part in the fishing. So we grew up as fishermen, but not fishermen like in the ocean or in the canal, just fishermen in our community. You know, it was it was always interesting, because you learned many. Well, we've seen many elders at that time cutting fish and smoking fish and barbecuing fish and doing many things with the fish, preparing it for mostly the winter. Yeah.
So, how old must you have been when you first started fishing?
I must have been about, I would say 7, 8, 9, somewhere around there. We were all really small. And yeah, my sister was up there when I remember her one time. She was up there, and she was only probably was 6 or 7 or 8, somewhere around there, young anyway. You know, we all took part in. It wasn't just. Everybody took part in the fishing. Yeah.
Yeah. What can you tell me about what your experience, or maybe stories from your father, grandfather, or other people in history, how the salmon population was then compared to what it is now?
Yeah. See, when I was young, I got married in an early age, just about, and I lived with my grandma for 3 or 4 years, and she was always mending her net, like making a net, and she had a very, very short net. Like I seen her set the net, and she would set the net, and in no time that net would be sinking because there were so many fish on there. And she had a huge smokehouse, and she was in the smokehouse just about all summer, and she was they smoked everything. They smoked the heads, the eggs. Well, they didn't smoke the eggs, they cured the eggs, they made bread out of it. And they just let it ferment till it was solid. But we never, like myself, never net fished. We just fished communal fishing. But there was people that it was illegal in those days for us to go fishing with a net, but we still did. And it was just, I don't know. It was kind of mixed up because they'd say, you know, you're not allowed to fish it, but they'd be right there watching you fish, and they wouldn't do nothing. And but we all fished. Like I didn't fish at that time because I didn't have a net. I started netting and fishing when I was about I don't know. I was about 18 or 19, around there, 17, and. But I couldn't fish later on because the fisheries took all the canoes away one time. They took, first of all, my brother had a really nice canoe and they took it away. And then they took mine away, and my mom phoned the fisheries. His name is Peterson, and what are you doing with Tom's boat? He said, well, there was a scale in there. We had to take it away. Somebody might use it for fishing. And then they took my dad's net and my not that canoe. They just kept taking the canoes off the reserve. There was no really proof that we were fishing. It was just there was a scale in the boat. But my uncle, we all had canoes. So like when I was a kid, the whole beach, there was canoes everywhere. Like my uncle had a beach there, and my granny had a beach. He had about half a dozen or more canoes there. And my uncle had, I don't know, 4 canoes, but they all used it for different purposes. Like, we used to have races, canoe races up here. The whole New Channel would come up. They didn't call it New Channel at that time. And they had upset canoe races, and actually, that's what my canoe was. It was a racing canoe. It wasn't. It was. I never used it for racing, but that's what Roy Taylor made it for me. He made most of the boats. He was a really talented boat maker, and he could make, like he made boats to fit the purpose. Like my granny always went to Shoemaker Bay to get bark for her stove, and she'd go down there, and she had a large canoe. It was wide and fairly long, and she'd go down there and fill her canoe up and pack the bark up to her house. I would ask her if I could help her, but no, she wanted to do it herself, and it was all on tides. Like if tides going down, she'd go down. Tides coming up, she'd be coming up. And in my time too, all we did, we never had no motors on our boats, canoes. We just paddled or rowed the boats, and that's how we set the net for a long, long time. And I remember when I first seen Fred Gus, he had a little 5-horsepower motor, and he was speeding down the river there, and everybody's looking at him because we were busy paddling down, rowing down there, trying to get to, we were fishing for springs at that time down by the pulp mill. And it was a lot harder work, but it wasn't like it is now. Like we have, our nets are 3 or 4 or 5 times longer than they used to be, because in those days, like my brother was fishing one time, and he just couldn't keep up. As soon as he took one fish off, there was 2 more hitting in, and he just tied it. He just went. I remember he was mad there one time. He said he couldn't keep the fish off, and he kept tying his net up. Anyway, it was like that in those days. There were so many fish. Yeah. People were sometimes just about sinking their boats. Well, some did. Yeah. But it was really interesting. Like it was in our time. Like it was mostly our tribe that did the fishing here. I didn't really recognize anybody else fishing except the sea shots. The sea shots we had many canoes. I think we had probably about dozen or more, maybe 2 dozen. But they were all sea shot canoes. Especially at the like Paper Mill Dam, we had canoes all along there, and we had canoes all the way down to like the Gallocks had canoes and the Gusses had canoes, and they lived right by the water there, and everybody had smokehouses. It was a time of year to look forward to because it was preparing for the winter. Like, there wasn't very many people working, native people working at that time anyway, because it was really hard for a native to get a job. The native used to have jobs a long time ago in the mill when it first started, but they would, what they would do, they would get paid once a month, but if they missed any work, they weren't paid. So it was really hard for them to look after their families and doing a 15-hour-a-day work every day. And so there wasn't, and it was hard, really hard for natives. The only way the native, well, later on in life, after, like, we got more privileges, your status, you weren't. They weren't. They would say, "Are you status?" And if the guy said yes, he said, "Well, we don't hire status people." But so some natives refused to get status cards, so they were classified as non-status, and they got jobs. Working was, the natives were always really, really strong people. They were strong from the very beginning, because they, like when they were whale hunting, they had to start preparing in November, start going into the water just about every day for a little while, till it got to all day. Well, not all day, say 8 hours, and then they'd start practicing in the ocean. So they'd go down there, my grandfather, Sayachipis, great-grandfather, he was a whale hunter, and he used to bathe in the water just about every day. If he missed 3 days, they would be harassing him, saying, "You know, you're a weakling, and you know, you're getting old and everything else." And he lived to be a very old man, and he was blind, and he could sing all day long about like different songs, because the songs were all different stories of hunting, stories of fishing. It was stories of capturing some other tribe, and stories about the different areas on the canal, and stories about the broken group. It was stories about hunting, fishing. It was stories about potlodges, weddings, funerals. And it was like when they'd go out warring with other tribes, they would come and sing a song, and if they weren't singing the song, everybody's mourning on the shore, because they knew it wasn't a victory, and there'd be a lot of losses in their family. But getting back to whale hunting, you know, whale hunting was really a dangerous job. Like, even not for us, it was for the whole non-native communities. The whaling boats, they were losing people left and right, because the whales would just flick the tails and tip the boat, and most of the people, like the ladies, most of the ladies that had husbands that were whale hunters, that were say 20 or 21, were single, because their husbands got the whales had tipped their boats over or something, because whale hunting was just about scientific pretty well, because if you speared the whale, as soon as you speared it once, it started moving, and you had to get, like the natives had to get 8 spears in there, and they all had 8 floats on there, and it never stayed in one spot. It's 2 miles it went, and sometimes a lot further than 2 miles before it got tired, and then they'd sew the mouth up, and the whale would turn over, and it would take them a week to paddle in here, like all in the line. It was, and they never, like they didn't bring much food out there with me, sometimes barely anything, and the only thing they had for, they would have a box with, they'd bring kindling and put sand in there and use that for heat. but everything had to be prepared. There were long, long ropes made out of cedar. It was really adventure, especially when they came back with a whale. Everybody had a feast. Like it was, like the natives had their feast in the winter time because there was no more work for them. Their work was done, and they were just feasting and getting ready for moving to another area. That's all they did was move from one area to another, wherever the fish or the berries or the whatever they needed. The seals, they had to get seals for their clothing. It was always something that they had to have. And they never really stayed like the chiefs had a humongous job because he had to prepare for everything. Like he had to prepare for who was going to get portions of, say, the whale, and who's going to get portions of the land, and who's going to sleep in certain areas in longhouses, and it was, and who was going to be a watch for enemies. Like they had to have a person watching 24 hours because natives were always battling each other because they wanted to keep the smaller bands small because they wanted to rule them. The smaller bands got big, they would come over and battle with them. And they were, like sea shots were one of the greatest, or still, or one of the top nation on the coast here. Like how's that a humongous population? We had many tribes join our band just for protection, and every band got smaller and smaller and smaller as the wars went on. You know, it just didn't. They just didn't. You know, the sickness came in after the settlers came in here, and but they were always traders. Like Sayachipis, he'd go down to Victoria and bargain, sell his furs and slaves sometimes. Like they were.
Was salmon an important trade commodity for the Seychelles?
It was. They did a lot of trading with the East Coast because the East Coast had some stone there that were really hard. So they had they used to use mussel shells to fall trees like a long time ago, and they'd go over there and get some kind of rock that they could sharpen, and they always took their salmon. Salmon was it wasn't as valuable as whale. Whale oil was like gold, and salmon were. It wasn't like there was a lack of salmon anywhere. There was always salmon, but we never really traveled to the mainland. The only time we went around, there was lots of songs and stories about traveling to Vancouver from here and going around the island, and. Yeah, salmon was. Like salmon is. There's so many different types of salmon, and every salmon was used for a different purpose. And there was. I don't know how they kept the salmon all winter, but it wasn't only salmon. It was all the seafoods. Like they used to smoke seal meat and save that on the winter time, and they had lots of furs. Like that was the main thing. There was boats and boatloads of furs going to China, and in fact that caused more war amongst the natives because some of the natives were trading their furs for guns, and they were going to other tribes and battling with them.
Can you tell me a little bit more about which salmon was used for a specific purpose? Because here you were sockeye, chum, coho, and spring. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, see, sockeye was the most tastiest fish. It's got a lot of flavor, and it's got lots of oil in there. So it was, everything had to be like a jerky, a really jerky. If it wasn't, you couldn't store things. They would make like, they would always have sheds outside that they made to store their stuff. And the main source of winter food was chum because it had very little oil, and yet, in fact, they say chum had lots of oil. I'm not sure which way, but I know chum was one of the salmons that would last a long time. I know it's because there's a lot of I don't know what they call it, slime on the skin, and it lasted. It would get really brittle, So I'm sure that lasted a long time. But the natives were good in. It didn't matter what they were. They were talented in everything, like gardening and fruit trees, berries, and everything was all dried. They had. But it's like the main source of food was actually the salmon, like after the sockeye came the coho. Coho only lasted maybe 3 weeks, and spring lasted 3 weeks, and chum. They never smoked. I don't know why myself, but they always said they waited for a while for the chum to. They wouldn't catch them when they were still silver. They would wait till they got darker. I don't know if they lasted long or why. But I know they always waited till they were kind of quahnin, they called them. But it was, they used it for trading, like even with the settlers that came here. I read a story that the settlers didn't have nets till they were surprised to see the natives fishing with nets when they came here. But the natives never ate much. Let's say meat. They didn't eat much meat. There was lots and lots of meat. Like one time, Spout wanted to go hunting, and he hired the sea shots. And they scared, they went up to about 3rd Avenue and beat their drums, and they caught 52 male deer, and he kept about 30, and they gave the rest to the Indians, but the Indians, natives, and the Shishas didn't want them. They wanted, so they gave them to the settlers that were there. But fish is what everybody looks forward to. It wasn't something that it was forgotten. It was something that was very important, just about as important as whale. Like whale was important all around the world. It didn't matter where you go, because in Europe they used it for light and machinery and everything, and we used it for candles. There's about more than a dozen things that we used it for. Like it was used for. Like hammocks, they use it for medicine. They use it for just about everything. If you looked into I can't remember all the things it was, but there are so many things that they used the whale oil for, and it was only given to very special people at potlatches. In fact, there was lots of potlatches, and they were always trading. It was, and sometimes the native sea shots would give land to some chief, but it wasn't really giving it to him. It was just like it's your land till I go to your potlatch and you can give it back to me. But there were so many stories, native stories, that that were lost in our, like during the residential school time. Like my granny and my uncles, and all they did was tell stories. They had no end to stories. They could talk all day and all night about fishing and hunting and all the experiences they had. And the travelings they did, like from going down, taking their long houses down the Broken Group and coming back up here, and like it was just many stories. It like the natives always had. Well, I wouldn't say they take the skins off the deer to make drums. Well, they used everything to make you know, different tools they had. They had to have tools and needles and forks, and they had forks, plates, all this all made of, and it had to be a certain wood. But yeah, fishing was it was a delicacy, actually. It was something that they counted on for the winter and for their whole life, actually. Yeah.
What is, just for you, very personally, what does salmon and fishing mean to you? I mean, you've done it all life, so it must be an essential part of who you are and what you've become and what you do. What does salmon mean to you personally?
Well, it means that I have a happy family. That's what it means, totally. Because without salmon you had nothing. Like, there was no extra income, nothing. We had to go out and catch salmon it was you could buy clothes, you could buy all cars, houses, and it was a thing that was a main part of my bringing the family up. Like, it was a way of helping, like, when the grandkids needed a house or something, they needed a payment, or it was something they could use for their education or their traveling. It meant a lot for everybody that was fishing. But what they called it was illegal fishing. They used to call it food fishing. I don't understand what the food fishing is, but that's what they called it. But we always sold our fish. Sea shots were the only ones that sold our fish. Sea shots, we fought like we had police in the trees back here, and they were always after us. They'd come into your house and take all the salmon away. It didn't matter if they phoned. They'd send somebody into my house and buy one salmon, and the guy would say, "Where did you get the salmon from those freezers?" They'd take it all away, never charge you, but they would take all the salmon away. If you sold the salmon on the river, they'd take all the salmon out of the canoe and still never charge you. It was like a way of bringing up a family. Like, if we were allowed to fish, sell fish, I sold fish even though I was not allowed to sell fish. And it really didn't matter to me, because I used to go to my uncle and I'd say, you know, there's fish in the river now. He said, well, go get it. And I said, well, we're not allowed to. We can't. The fisheries are across there. He said, doesn't matter. Just go out there and fish, he said. So I'd go out there and fish, and I'd sell the fish and use the fish for, it was all just the family. Like, the family was benefited. But in a lot of cases, people, like some of my friends, they threw potlatches. They were preparing it was a big feast every year for the tribe, because of the salmon. The salmon was, that's what the main meals were, salmon and seafood in these potlatches. It was, but for the people that were fishing, it was really hard for us to fish, because they were taking our canoes away, and we'd have to make more canoes, and if we went to sell the fish, they wouldn't really Normally, we were allowed to smoke fish, but we were allowed and not allowed. It depends which way they wanted it. Like I would take salmon to a plant, and the fisheries are there, and I'd say, I'm just getting it smoked. And sometimes they say, well, you know, if you smoke one salmon to the person there, we're going to shut your plant down, so I'd have to go somewhere else. But it was always difficult selling salmon until we got the right to sell salmon. But the only reason we got the right to sell the salmon because it was costing them, I would say, millions of dollars just to prevent us from earning more, for getting ahead in this world. Like, they wanted to keep us right down as low as they could. But it was, I know my friends that weren't natives, non-natives, they would be fishing, they didn't bother them. But they knew we were a fish community. Well, all native communities were fish communities. And it was, but we were the first ones, I think, in BC, or the second ones to get a license to sell fish. And, but our tribe has been always the main tribe in, I would say, close to BC, because without, like, it wasn't until the 60s one of our members decided, his name is Richard Watts, he decided, you know, we're not going to pay taxes anymore. You know, we shouldn't be paying taxes. So they said, he took him to court and he won. So after that, all natives didn't pay taxes. So they, you know, they were, probably our band saved millions of dollars now and billions of dollars for all the bands in BC because of our tribe. Our tribe's always been head of, actually one time they wanted to form New Channel Tribal Council, and they wanted me to be a president, and like it was Bert Mack and Art Peters, and they came to me, and I didn't want it because I have no time for being like a president of the. But they told me to go in there, and all I did was sign checks and papers and stuff like that. But that's when they formed a. It was Allied Tribes at that time. But our band's always been the main band amongst all the bands. I would say everywhere, because we were always just the first ones to start anything, and we're still a leading band. There are some bands that claim to be like Napoleon. They captured everybody, and they still owned the land, and Caesar and Hitler, and you know, people like that. They might have, I don't know if they did, they might have been a great nation at one time, but I've had no record in my, like all the stories I heard from my grandmother and my uncles and everything, there was never any mention about who fought who, because it wasn't something you could talk about, you know, because the kids in those days were, they were trained to fight when they were 11 or 12 years old, because there was always people coming in. And I don't know, fishing was, I was always really lucky in my fishing. Like, people never knew why I caught so many fish when I first started fishing, because, and it was only because I had a really deep net. I had 90 mesh deep net, and I was catching all kinds of fish. Never using shorter nets, shorter mesh nets, and but I was always really lucky when I was. But it was. You have to have energy to be lucky. You know, you can't just stay awake all day and fish. But my mom was really a really talented smoker. So was my granny. Like my mom, she could cut fish, say 100 fish up in just a short while. It takes me all day just to cut fish. And she was cutting them and had them in the smokehouse. But she was a really hard worker. She was always in the garden, just like they used to do a long time ago. Like people a long time ago had gardens. Like my grandfather had a big garden. My dad had a huge garden. Like it's just below his place now. He had a huge potato field down there, and they were busy all the time. It was really hard for us to do anything a long time ago. Like we were promised nothing would change. You'd still be able to get your wood. You'd still be able to make canoes and build your homes. But soon as the papers were signed, they said, no, you can't cut wood anymore. You can't go hunting anymore. You can't go fishing anymore. You know, it was, but it was really hard for, like, even my generation to do anything, because we had lost all our culture, we had lost all our language, all our clothes were furs and cedar bark. Clothes were all taken away. Everything was taken away, and we were in my time, they were given suit and ties and shirts and everything else, but they took everything away. There wasn't a thing we had to dress that way. We had to talk that way. We had to. It was hard being a native in those days.
Have you seen a change? Because I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but from being not allowed to fish and your canoes being taken away and nets and everything, Seychat now is, I believe, the only band on the island, or maybe even on the coast, that manages their own fisheries in their area. What do you think of that, or what do you know about that? It'll
always carry on the same way. Seychat's never change, or really, they're not a warring people like they used to be. They're fighting people. They like if you right now, if you say, well, you can't do it, they'll say, I'll prove it. I can do it. You know, they're always the first ones to step up to the plate to say, you know, what you have done is wrong. You know, you've taken our land and given it to immigrants that didn't have no land. They were poor. They came over and they were promised this land, and all our land was taken away, bits and pieces at a time. Like it was, the natives knew where all their land was. They had names for all their land, and there was acres and acres and acres. And they, like when they were signing papers, they couldn't understand the non-native language, and they would tell them, you know, this is what you're going to have, but they never did get that. It was always something smaller and smaller. And people, natives were never, they were really, I would say, like what the rest of the world should be now. They're like right now, the reason we have so much problem in the world is because everybody wants to tell other people what to do. You couldn't do that in our band, because, you know, once you start saying, oh, he did this, or he went fishing, or he did this and he did, it would cause trouble in the band, and it'd be a band fighting each other. No, if somebody did wrong a long time ago, they'd handle the thing right away and say, you know, you've got to get cleansed, you've got to do. They would have things of settling the problem. So the whole, say, 4 or 5 or 7 bands in our community would all live peacefully. They had to live peacefully. You know, it was, they never butted in. If somebody was doing, say, if they didn't like the way somebody was fishing, or they were like, they all had their own territory. If somebody went into the territory, they wouldn't start trying to cause trouble. They'd just straighten it out right there, saying, you know, we got to have a meeting, and so without you, because you've done that, what you have done was wrong. Now you've got to throw a potlatch to forgive what you have done. And it was the communities were all. It was just a well-run. each band had to be well-run, big family, even though there was many different tribes in each band.
What do you know about how Seychat salmon fishery management is right now?
It's right now. It's we're the luckiest people in the whole coast. Like, we've always been the luckiest people in BC because of the way we've handled salmon. Salmon is the main thing. What else could you really you'd really want more than salmon? And it was people that went and did things to prove that we could fish, and we weren't going to listen to you, because even though, like, everybody thinks, oh, the natives are fishing, they shouldn't be fishing. I'm going to get in the net and go fishing. But they don't realize their seine boats and gill netters are catching, you know, a lot more fish than we are. We're catching just a small, say, 5 or 6% at one time, 3% at one time. And it's not the catching fish they're worried about, non-natives. They don't want natives to get ahead in this world. I think if we were allowed to carry on our traditional ways, we would have been all millionaires on the reserve, because we had so much talent and so much things to trade and do. And you know, it was people that were, it was just, people were so discriminated against. So, like, native people, because they were natives. It wasn't because they were from Asian or Europe or anything. They were given privileges to work and given land and everything else, but we weren't. We weren't. The only thing we fought for was our fish. If we had the, like I always said, if I had the right to sell my fish, like, I would have been millionaire or had a big seine. There was no end to all the things. Like, we'd sell our fish for, say, just a small amount, and they'd sell it for, say, 75 cents, 70% more than what they bought it off us for. We were getting practically nothing. And all our fishing, like, we'd bring, I'd bring a truckload of fish to a plant, and he'd say, yeah, we're going to.
Just go on and just check whether it's still running. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure that we're not running out of battery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, what I did times, I'd bring truckloads to, say, a smoke plant in Victoria, and like $10,000 worth. And the guy would say, I'll pay you, write your check, and the check it bounced. He had no money in the bank. And so I'd go to the fisheries and I'd say, you know, this guy's not allowed to buy our fish, but he bought our fish. Are you going to do anything about it? He says, no, that's your problem. You got to go get a $50 thing, take it to the courthouse, and you got to deliver the note to him saying, you know, he's got to go to court. But it didn't matter. They wouldn't do nothing. If it was a non-native that did the wrong, it was okay. But if I sold the fish and they seen me, I couldn't even sell to my own cousin. My cousin Pauline Watts came to my house one time, and I gave her some fish, and they stopped her on the road and confiscated the fish, and they took all the fish away that I had that day. You know, my own cousins I couldn't give fish to. One time I was at coming out of the marina, and my motor stopped, so I took it down to the bottom of Third Argyle, and I had 8 fish in my boat, and they followed me down there and took the fish away, because I was supposed to go straight home and process the food for myself. It wasn't. They just made sure you didn't have enough. You couldn't make any money for gas or nets or equipment for fishing. They just wanted. they were so strict with us. Like they would be counting the fish when I was fishing. I'd make a set, and I'd come in, and they'd be the fisheries would be waiting, and they'd say, "How many fish did you get?" I said, "I got 50." "No, you didn't. You got 80." I said, "No, I got 50." And they'd say, "Well, you can't touch that fish. We're confiscating your boat and your net and everything because we counted 80." And we got some more people coming down to count the fish. They counted the fish. There was 50 there. So they walked away. You know, it was always like that. It was just so strict with our fishing. They spent so much time watching us, and it's just about the same now. When we have an opening, we have the fisheries out there, we have the police out there, we have our everybody's checking on us to make sure we're not going to catch more than the quota. But they're the ones that set the quota. You know, we don't want to catch more than our quota too. If there's conservation, that's the most important thing in our community is conservation. We sooner not fish. We've done that many years. We on our own we didn't go out fishing because of the conservation. Fishing is like my dad wasn't a fisherman. My mom was more a fisherman because my dad worked all the time. He was a longshoreman, and he was a foreman down there for 27 years. And but he was a very hard worker and a very, I don't know. I sometimes I thought he was too ambitious. Like we used to have beams across the hatches, and they were only 8-inch beams. And he'd walk across the beams. And I was on the winch driving, and oh, boy, and then you drop a long ways if you ever. But he'd walk across those beams. But he was a really hard worker too, yeah. But all natives had to. Well, they were all really good workers. Every native I know, like even now, we had to. The natives are always the best in whatever they do. It's always. I think they would have been the best in everything, even education, if we were given the chance. Like I've talked to people that were principals for 35 years, teachers, and they hated natives. And this lady said, I don't know why my mom hated natives. She's a principal at the school for 35 years, or a teacher and principal for 35 years, and she just hated natives. And even now, like the people say, can you move? I was at an Oktoberfest, and they said, can you move? And I said, I thought he was joking. He said, no. And he said, I hate natives. He said, if you don't move, I'm going out there and fixing your car. He said, I know which one it is. But even today, this was at the Oktoberfest, like 2 years ago. It's hard to see, it's hard to imagine how natives are so different, and yet we're not even Canadians, they'd say. Like we don't own any land. Our land doesn't belong to us. If they want to say this house, if they wanted it off here, it's theirs. Natives don't own any land. I think that there's an interior tribe now that finally got possession of their land, and it's been the first land that's ever been given to natives in Canada. But you take anybody that comes here, they can live, they could do anything they want, they could start their businesses. We can't start our businesses on their land because we got no land. It's been something like I don't know, it's something that I've seen so many homes, like elderly people die and they just mow the house down and give it to somebody else, and the land, which wasn't like that before. Like I said before, everybody had their areas for hunting and fishing, but it's still not the best. There's more. There's 85% of the kids taken off the reserves are natives. I mean, that are taking off the reserves are natives, 85%. And at one time, it was natives were like about 60 or 70% people in jails, and they were going to put me in jail one time. And I was chopping wood in the woodshed, and the police came and they said, "You're going to jail." And I said, "Oh, why?" "Never mind, get in the car," he said. They took me to the car, and my dad come running out of the house, and he said, "What's going on?" He said, "Oh, your son robbed the store last night," he said, "and we got 3 witnesses." And he said, "Oh," he said, "how do you know it was him?" "Well, he has brown hair, brown skin, and brown eyes, and he's about 6 feet tall." And he said, my dad said, "What time was that?" And he said, "About 9:30 or 10. He said, "Well, no, my son was in bed." He said, "If you don't get out of here, I'm going to get my shotgun and shoot both of you," he said. But that's what they used to do. We used to be in a crowd, and they saw a store was broken into, they'd pick 2 or 3 of the guys up and send them to jail, because we couldn't get lawyers in those days. It wasn't until the 60s we could finally get lawyers. 60s was a big year for us. We had lots accomplished in those days. It was like voting and going into beer parlors, and but natives were they weren't just like there was alcoholics in those days, and they had their stories and stories and stories, because there was lots of stories, because everything was done illegally. Everything the natives done was illegal. If it wasn't illegal, they'd make it illegal. Like even when the first settlers came to this town, they didn't like the natives, and they wanted to shoot them, but they sent a letter to the premier. I forget the guy's name in Vancouver. Anyway, they sent a letter there saying, "We need a letter. We won't be able to shoot the natives. Can you give us a reason?" "Yeah, if they got long hair, you could shoot them." So that was their. They were able to shoot at any native around here, in the valley here. If they did something wrong and they shot them, if the guy had long hair, it was illegal for them to shoot the native. And even like they've shot people right across where the airport was for picking potatoes, and they were chasing guys that had been picking potatoes, and they were shooting at them because they had long hair. But the natives were always really fast. They were all in really good shape. They had to be. Their living wasn't like sitting down and watching TV. Their living was to food and their families. It was.
How do you see the future for your children and your grandchildren as a whole, but also specifically for Salmon? Because I noticed that Dakota, when we were on the water, she was helping out with the fishing. Do you think she's going to take over your tradition, or?
Well, if the fisheries give us a chance, and Dakota will be a really prosperous fisherman if they give us a chance to be what we really are. You know, we're hard workers, good fishermen, and it's just the future. I think for natives are getting better and better. I don't even know why we were given reserves that were places to live that wasn't even ours. It was just like going to a prison. You can live there, but you can't own the land, you can't own the minerals, you can't own the trees, you don't own anything. You're living here, but you're not. And I don't even think they had us registers as Canadians in Ottawa. Like we just never had the chance to inherit like things that were given to us a long time ago. Like to say, I want to sell this house. Who am I going to sell it to? I can't sell the house. It's got to be a band member, and there's not many band members that can have lots of money. Every band member I know, like, it's they're just struggling to get ahead. You know they're struggling when they're the only ones that the kids are taking away all the time. They never check to see if the kids are like that are non-natives. It's always, they've got to go to the natives first to find out, make sure they're, if they hear any rumors, and everything is rumors in this world, nothing is the truth. If a person doesn't tell the truth, if they tell a lie in a day, there's something wrong. And I watch Dr. Oswald, and that's the way he says, people tell 14 lies a day, and he says, if you tell one story to one person, by the time it gets down to the 20th person, you don't even know what he told them. Yeah, so it's like that everywhere. We're always trying to get into somebody else's business. You shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that. But if you're a hard worker, you're gonna prosper. It doesn't matter who you are. It's like, it's hard for a native to set a goal, because how are they going to set a goal when they don't have jobs? But if they were given the privilege of fishing, their goals would be tremendous. They'd be able to all be really good fishermen, because all my grandchildren, I teach them right from the very beginning, right from 11-year-olds. They're learning how to fish, and it was because I started early and learned how to fish, and so I tell them, and now they're like my nephews and things. They're all good fishermen. We have lots and lots of really good fishermen. But they're all taught by their parents too, and grandparents. Yeah.
Can I ask you one more question? If you have to make a sentence, salmon is, it starts with salmon is, a sentence that describes really, or maybe even two words or one word, but that summarizes everything that you've told me and that you've experienced in your life, etc. What would you say if you would have to have one sentence saying salmon is, or one word, or what is for you the absolute essence?
If I was to say one word, I'd say salmon is native. They're native fish, native Indians. They're not immigrants. They were here thousands of years before we were here. But salmon is part of our family. They worshipped the salmon. Every time the first salmon that was caught had to be brought to the chief, and they had a potlatch. Salmon was, they thought, they used to think they've got to send the boats, that first salmon on a brand new carpet and out to the ocean, so that they could tell the other salmon natives. They didn't know immigrants. They thought that the salmon was native to feed them, look after them. That's what they thought a long time ago. And it was a main part of our history, because they worshipped the salmon. If one person come in there with a salmon and he threw it on the beach and let it rot, they would kill that person. That's how important the salmon was. They would treat them just like humans. Yeah, they had to be looked after.
Is there anything you would like to say that I haven't asked you? Anything, doesn't matter. Something about salmon, or something about you, or whatever, something that I haven't asked you.
It's just that this world would be a better place to live if we all treated each other good. If we weren't trying to point fingers at each other. and thinking that something is wrong in their opinion where it is right in other opinions. And this goes into every category, like fishing. You know, we have, everybody has their own way of living. We're all made differently. There's not two people in the world that are the same, but there's too many people in the world that think you should be doing this, you should be doing that, or you should be golfing this way, or you should be shooting this way, or you shooting a basketball this way, or you should be doing something. But it's the person is different. You know, we're all different. That's what makes the world. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate this.